What's it like to play for the King? Are we getting audio, Matt? What's it like to play for the King? What's it like to be so good at something that the King asks you to come to do it for you? For Johann Sebastian Bach, this happened when he was 62 years old. So after a very long career in music, Johann had a son whose name was Karl. Karl was also a professional musician. He was an organist in a city called Potsdam, which is near Berlin. And Potsdam happened to be where the King of Prussia had his summer home. So the King of Prussia was aware of Johann Sebastian Bach because of his son and because of his son's musical abilities. And so he invited Bach from Leipzig, where Bach lived and performed, into Potsdam to play. So this isn't the fanciest castle for the King of Prussia. This is just the simple summer palace. This one is designed for relaxation. The King of Prussia, Frederick the Great, was known for enjoying his dogs, wanting to relax. And this was that, just the lesser palace for summer enjoyment. And so this was where Bach was invited. And in the palace, there was a number of the King of Prussia had his court surrounding there. And when Bach was announced, the King of Prussia said, "Old Bach has come, gentlemen." And so a 62-year-old Bach comes in. And Bach was known as a keyboardist. He had been trained mostly on the organ. He played a lot on the harpsichord. The forte piano was a very new instrument at the time. And so the king had several of these, and he said, "Bach, maybe you'd like to try, experiment a little bit with my pianos." So Bach sat down and played a whole lot of his original music, playing his fugues and piano pieces there. And at the end of Bach's little keyboard concert, the king had a surprise for Bach. And the king said, "Bach, I've come up with a little musical idea, and I want to know if you can make some music out of it." And so listen to this. This is the King of Prussia, what he asked Bach to make music from. Now, for any of you musicians out here, this feels less like a melody and more like a trap, being asked to make music out of this. It's this jumpy, descending chromatic piece. It's hard to tell where it's going or where it's resolved. And the king said, "Bach, write music for me." So Bach sits back down at the piano, and he, on the spot, comes up with two fugues that are on the basis of this theme. But he's immediately dissatisfied with his own work. So Bach says, "King, with your permission, I want to take this theme back with me to Leipzig, and I want to work on it." And so that's what he does. He takes this theme, and he calls it the Thema Regium. That means the theme of the kingdom, this little bit of music that he's been offered. And so he goes home, and over the next several months in Leipzig, he writes 2 fugues. He writes 10 canons. He writes a 4-part sonata. He takes all of this and puts it together into one musical offering. And that's what he calls it. He calls it the musical offering to the king. So today you'll see this BWV 1079. You'll see this BWV notation. And that's an acronym in German. It means Bachwerke Verzeichnis. Basically, it's Bach's catalog of music. And there are so many pieces that you will absolutely lose track of them if you don't have them numbered. And so that's why I have this counting. So what's it like to play for the king? What was that for Bach, to actually sit down at this new instrument, the forte piano, with the king and the king's advisors? You know, the king himself was a musician. He played the flute. He wanted to show off a little bit, and I think a little bit that's why he laid the trap that he laid for Bach with this music to make around. But what was it like? So this is the grave of Johann Sebastian Bach. And it's in Leipzig. It's inside a church called St. Thomas's Church. And this is the church actually where Bach spent the last 30 years of his career as a music director. It was a church and school combination. And ironically, for Bach wasn't new to playing for the king. In fact, the king is the only one he ever played for. And so when he went back, I wonder if he had that in mind at the church where he was working. So Bach was famous for writing these passions. These are the crucifixion stories in the Gospels, set to music, orchestration. And he wrote 4 of them. 2 of them still survive. 2 of them we don't have anymore. But they tell the biblical stories, and they use actually the language that the gospel writers use. And the voices speak the roles of Jesus and the disciples and everyone else who's near the cross, these passions. And we're going to listen to an excerpt from St. John's Passion, which is one of the most famous ones. This is the very opening of the piece, the very beginning. And I want you to hear how the strings set the place for the voices then to come in and give praise to the king that Bach was always playing for. Bach is someone who had been playing for the king for all of his career. But his name meant something before he was even born. In fact, in central Germany, where Bach grew up, the word meant musician. And the reason it meant musician, you'll understand why the Count of Arnstadt, when he was in need of someone to lead music for his city musical group, said, "Bring me a Bach." And this is why. So this is a musical genealogy of the generations before Bach. At the very top would be his great-grandfather, below that, grandfathers, and below that, his father's generation. So just in central Germany, in an area probably about 100 miles around, these were the professional musicians only in the Bach family. So you have people leading church music, you have people leading court music, you have individual instrumentalists, professional organists, professional singers, a massive, massive family of musicians. And Johann Sebastian Bach is not even pictured on this slide. So this is what came before him. He never met most of these people. So his father there is number 11 in the lower central. His father was Johann Ambrosius Bach. So that was his dad. And his dad was naturally a professional musician. That's what the Bach family did. So, unfortunately, when Bach was just 10 years old, his musician father died. And for a lot of people, that would probably interrupt their lives and their musical aspirations. For Bach, of course, it didn't. So Bach was sent to live with an older brother of his who was already a professional musician, naturally. And his musical education continued with his brother. And in fact, it maybe even increased with his brother, who was such an excellent musician. So Bach became a singer. He learned the violin and the viola, and especially he learned the keyboards. So he showed this incredible gift for the organ and for the harpsichord early in his career, and that's what he did with his brother. At the same time, he was learning the great composers of recent history, whether they were German, Italian, and French. And the point here was that he was building off of something. We sometimes have an idea with people accomplishing a lot that it's this individual genius that comes out of nothing, but wow, what an inheritance Bach had musically that he was coming from. And later, he became really well known for his use of harmony, for his use of counterpoint, for his fugues, all these musical techniques which he was expert of. But it was entirely built on a foundation of his family and artistry of the people of his time. And beyond that, Bach had a really strong theological foundation as well. So Bach was a Lutheran in that tradition, which was very strong in central Germany. And in fact, St. Thomas Church, where Bach ended up teaching for 3 decades, was a church where Martin Luther had preached in the past. And there was a really strong sense of the role that music played in worship for Lutherans, which was adapted from the Catholic Mass with some changes, some shortenings. But music was entirely tied into theology. When Bach died, his estate recorded all of his books, and something like 80-90% of them were religious books. Those are the books that he was left with. And we actually have his Bible, which is kind of cool. And in fact, it's in America. So it's at the Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. In the 1830s, there was a German immigrant family who came with this Bible. About 100 years after that, some local people realized just how special this Bible was. So this is it. This is the Luther Bible that Bach and his family used at their house. And I want to read for you from this passage that's highlighted here and which Bach has noted. So this is from 2 Chronicles. This is the dedication of Solomon's temple and the moment that happens here. The trumpeters and musicians joined in unison to give praise and thanks to the Lord. Accompanied by trumpets, cymbals, and other instruments, the singers raised their voices in praise to the Lord and sang, "He is good, his love endures forever." Then the temple of the Lord was filled with the cloud, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple of God. And there, in his handwriting, which appears here, Bach has written, "Where there is devotional music, God with his grace is always present." And so when Bach sat down at his organ, he was anything but just an individual genius who'd been created out of thin air. He is the bearer of an inheritance. So Bach, later in his life, became known for his composition. At the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, there's a stained glass window that celebrates the life of Bach. And on the left side of it, that you can see over here, in German it says, "Sing a new song to the Lord." And right next to it, in tiny script, there's the letters J. That's an acronym. And it's a reference to this. So again, in the upper left-hand side of the piece, you see the letters J. This is a Latin phrase, Jesu juva. It means, Jesus help me. And it's his compositional prayer. It's his composer's prayer. And it's almost a plea as much as it is a prayer. Jesus help me. How can you make music without the author of all music? How can you make beauty without the author of all beauty? And this was the conviction that Bach had when he was composing and why he wrote those letters in the upper left-hand corner of his scores. There's other reasons, too, that he needed Jesus' help in his work. So his duties in Leipzig, where he was director of the St. Thomas Church and schools. So first of all, he had to direct a music schedule for 4 churches every week, so the 4 main Lutheran churches throughout the city. He was responsible to lead the city's special music events, so whether for holidays or celebrations, whatever that might be, his job was to program and arrange whatever would happen there. He was managing and directing performance groups, whether they were city groups, sometimes court groups. And these are not small music groups. We're talking about 18 singers, 17 or 18 instrumentalists that he was managing groups of as he was working in Leipzig. And on top of that, he was responsible for student instruction and lessons. And this is in singing and keyboards, organ especially, but in other instruments as well. These were his Leipzig responsibilities. But I want to pause on this first one. So there's a tradition in Lutheran churches of the time that part of a church service, there has to be a cantata. Who knows what a cantata is? So in a cantata, it's a mixed vocal and instrumental piece. And it was kind of standard in Lutheran services to have one every week. So it can range anywhere from like 15 minutes all the way up to 20, 25, sometimes even 30 minutes. So it's a long musical piece. It's not one that the congregation sings along with, it's a performed piece for the crowd. And so Bach was responsible for directing the music schedule for these 4 churches. But he did something a bit beyond that, which is he wrote original music for every week of the church year. He wrote original cantatas. So for all these 4 churches could play Bach's original cantata every week. And so he did that for the entire church calendar. He did more than 50 cantatas. And then he did it again, and then he did it again, and then he did it again, and then he did it again. And by the time he was done, there was more than 300 original cantatas. Each of these pieces is around 20 minutes long or longer. It was enough so that the entire church calendar could be played with just his original music about 5.5 times. And this was not part of his job, to compose 300 cantatas that everybody could use all year long, but he did that. So astonishingly, of these more than 300 cantatas that Bach composed, we actually still have more than 200 of them that we can hear today, which you can hear today. And that's part of those 1,100 pieces of Bach's that we can still hear now. And of course, this is composing hundreds and hundreds of hours of music at every imaginable complexity, from solo pieces for various instruments to duets, to massive symphonies on the other side, his great passions, and the Mass in B minor, which involved a huge group of musicians and lasts more than an hour. All of this is the legacy of the production that he was doing. Most of us don't know that of all of these works, 75% of them were written specifically for church worship, including the piece that you just heard. Disney has taken it over to have us think that it means castles, but that's not actually what it originally was. And this massive amount of music, to be producing it, is even more amazing to think about when you think about his home life. So 4 of Bach's children went on themselves to become noted composers. So maybe not surprising to you now that you've seen the family tree that the Bachs came from. But what's maybe more astonishing is that there were 20 children for Bach. His first wife died young, and then he remarried and continued to have children. So you can imagine what that household at home was like when Bach was doing his composing. But there's something else. Of those 20 children that Bach had, only 10 of them survived to adulthood. So that means that there were 10 children who died in that household during the time that he was raising this family. And the sense that there was always some profound grief near in this household, in this family, it had to have been so strongly felt. And you can understand why Bach would want to write in his compositions, Jesus help me, Jesu Juve, J. In his creativity, Bach went so far beyond his duties in creating new music. And this calls to mind Psalm 96, which is the psalm that's quoted there in the stained glass window in the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. It says, "Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, praise his name. Proclaim his salvation day after day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples." Bach wasn't much of a traveler. During his lifetime, he probably never got more than 150 miles or so away from where he was born. He never left what we would consider to be modern-day Germany in his travels. So he wasn't much of a voyager himself. But he was known for his discoveries. 100 years later, the Polish pianist Chopin said, "Bach is like an astronomer who finds the most wonderful stars." What a lovely note of discovery. And speaking of discovery, in the 1960s and 1970s, NASA was trying to decide what they should do with some of these new spacecraft that they were developing. And one of the team of astronomers noticed that there was something that was going to happen in the 1970s that wouldn't happen again for another 200 years, so it was a very rare opportunity. And that was the alignment of the outer planets. So Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune were going to be aligned so that you could visit them all on one trip. And that makes it feasible to do some really cool things that you couldn't do usually with just one spacecraft. So they designed these two missions called Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 to shoot off in the 1970s and then throughout the course of the 1980s visit these planets. And it would be the first time that Uranus and Neptune had ever been visited by the spacecraft. Also the best equipment that we'd ever had at Jupiter and Saturn. So there was a lot to be excited about. But they also noticed that if you take these spacecraft and you slingshot them next to 4 different planets, it's going to make your spacecraft go really, really fast. And in space, you can only stop if you have fuel to stop, because there's no air to slow you down, right? So this spacecraft, it can't slow itself down. It's just going to speed up, and that's that. And they knew that Voyager 1 and 2 were going to go shooting out of the solar system at incredible speeds. In fact, 38,000 miles per hour is how fast Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are traveling. And this kind of captured people's imagination. So these are the first human-made objects that have left the solar system, right? So we never actually sent objects outside of the sun's gravity before. We've never done that. So this is the first time that it's ever going to happen. So that felt like an opportunity to do something to like memorialize what a cool moment this is. There's also this romantic idea that maybe someday the spacecraft, as it's wandering out in the darkness, well, blazing through the darkness, that somehow it would be caught and captured by someone. Maybe some alien species would discover it. And if they did, well, we want to tell them the story of planet Earth. We want them to learn a little bit about people. So the astronomer Carl Sagan was given the responsibility of, all right, how are we going to make a message for aliens? And what's going to be in the message? So they took some basic scientific information, which they depicted visually to try to define a common language. And then they decided, we want sounds. We want the sounds of Earth to be part of this package. So they decided, okay, we're going to make a record out of gold. It's going to be the golden record. And in this record, we're going to have instructions about how to play the record, but they're going to be graphical instructions that our aliens can figure out. And we're also going to have tracks. We're going to put tracks of audio on this record. So then Carl Sagan started this process of what goes on the record. So he went around and started talking to people that he knew about, if we want to represent planet Earth with a record, what do we do? So he went to the biologist, Lewis Thomas. What would you put on this record? And Lewis Thomas said, I would send the complete works of Johann Sebastian Bach. But that would be boasting. I also think it would take a much larger record, probably one about twice the size of the spacecraft for all those pieces. But in the end, they put 3 of Bach's original works on the golden record, alongside some other composers and musicians, but also just sounds of ceremonial sounds from different cultures, people speaking, giving speeches, children at play, animals, just a wide variety of sounds. But 3 of those tracks are pieces by Johann Sebastian Bach. And that is more than any other composer or any other person on the golden record. So although we didn't give him the whole golden disc, we gave him more than we gave to everyone else. Some of you might have seen that recently in the news, Voyager has actually appeared again. I don't know if anyone who follows science might have noticed this. But finally, after its nearly 50 years, Voyager is dying. So Voyager 1, Voyager 2 have these nuclear power sources, which over time they've been turning off more and more of the instruments to try to make the power last a little bit longer on Voyagers. But the power is almost out. They were unable to communicate with Voyager 1 for a while recently, and this is expected. Actually, when they were originally launched, I don't think that they imagined they would get 50 years of life out of these spacecraft. It's been a pretty amazing thing. By the way, the project team for the Voyagers, a couple of the original people still work on it. So there's like 80-year-olds who like still come in and play a role in the Voyager missions, which is quite cool. So this golden record with Bach's music on it is now 15 billion miles away from Earth. That's about 4 times as far as Pluto is from the sun. So just to give a sense of how far it's gone. And it's still blazing away at 38,000 miles per hour at full speed. And you may think that this is a story about how far Bach got, but it's the opposite. So the golden record has gone 15 billion miles. The nearest star is 25 trillion miles away. That means that in the 50 years since Voyager launched, it's gone less than 1/10 of 1% of the way to the nearest star. But moreover, it's not aiming at that star. It's aiming into vast darkness. It's nowhere near anything. For hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, it's not going to be near anything but the interstellar medium, just the pure blackness of space. This isn't about how far Bach got on the golden record. It's about how short our reach is compared to the Creator's reach. Here's what the psalmist writes about this. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? near the end of his life, Bach was a little bit famous, but not really as a composer. He was famous as an organist. He was famous for his keyboard skills. But something happened after Bach died, which is that the great composers kept rediscovering Bach. Mozart, upon hearing Bach's fugues, said, "Now there is a man that one can learn from." Mendelssohn, about 100 years later, discovered the St. Matthew's Passion that Bach had composed and put on the first public performance that it had ever had. And it had international acclaim. This was, at the time, it was 100-year-old music. In 2019, the BBC did a survey of active composers, like living composers, still composing music today, and they asked everybody to rank the top composers in the world. And 300 years after his death, Bach came in first in a vote of those 174 living composers. So now we know him more as a composer than a performer. And in truth, there's lots of evidence in his life that Bach was seeking out titles for himself, seeking out opportunities, seeking out fame in some sense. Bach lived with the sense that he and his family was always just one disaster away from poverty. And that was the reality of the time for the vast majority of people. This is his second wife, Anna. She was actually a professional singer, a professional musician herself, and so brought that into the family. In fact, later she helped hand copy a lot of the scores that he was writing. She was very intimately involved in the music in the house. And when Bach died, he left Anna with a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, and an adult son with disabilities. Those were the three people that were still living at the household. And then Bach's salary ended, of course, because he no longer has this role as Kapellmeister, and his estate was divided among his children, and that was that. 10 years later, Anna died, and when she died, she was given what was considered to be a poor person's, an impoverished person's funeral. She was given the title Almosenfrau, which means a woman who has nothing, basically who was dependent on charity. And that was just 10 years later after Bach died. So the final surviving child of Johann Sebastian Bach was his daughter, Regina, and who was still alive about 50 years later after Bach died. And this is a letter that Beethoven wrote to a friend of his in Vienna. A good friend whom I recently visited showed me the account of what had been collected for the daughter of the immortal god of harmony. And that's in reference to Bach's final surviving daughter. I was astonished at the small sum which Germany, and especially your Germany, has dedicated to this person, who I so highly esteem because of her father. This brings me to the thought, how would it be if I brought out something for her benefit on a subscription basis? So Regina was herself childless, and that was why she was dependent and why there were benefits for her happening in Germany. And Beethoven later dedicated the first performance of his Third Symphony to this daughter, the last surviving daughter of Bach, and the proceeds went to her. And Bach's fame, as great as it is now, this was the last time, I think, that Bach's fame paid off directly for someone that he had known, right? Like, Beethoven doing this concert for her wouldn't have happened without his fame. But Bach had a sense of fame, and whose fame he cared about. Just as in the upper left-hand corner of his scores, he put JJ, Jesus help me. And the bottom right of his scores were these initials, SDG. And that's another Latin phrase, Soli Deo Gloria. And that means only for the glory of God. And this was the invocation as he completed a piece, as it was finished. Only for the glory of God. SDG is what he would put on the bottom of his pieces. And for all of his vanities, like all of us, really this is a prayer of humility. Bach once wrote, "The final aim and reason of all music is nothing other than the glorification of God and the refreshment of the Spirit." And that echoes the Westminster Catechism. What's the chief purpose of people? To glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And that's echoed there. But the amazing thing about music is it can do both things. It can both glorify God and bring us enjoyment. That makes it a blessed tool for glory making, for glory giving. Psalm 105 says, "Give praise to the Lord, proclaim His name. Make known among the nations what He has done. Sing to Him, sing praise to Him. Tell of all His wonderful acts. Glory in His holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord in His strength. Seek His face always." And when Bach writes SDG on the bottom of his musical scores, it's a prayer of confession of his own vanity, of his own sin. It's an offering. It's giving what he has. It's giving it back to God. And it's a proclamation that only the glory of God is worth working for. That all of it is to the glory of God, and all of it is only to the glory of God. Because the one who hung the stars, the one who forgave our sins, is worthy to be praised. This is the word of the Lord from the Gospel of Mark. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put. He watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." I think that in this story, Bach's not the one maybe dropping in the 2 pennies. He's maybe the one dropping in the Mass in B minor, or the St. Matthew's Passion, or 300 cantatas. And I think the danger of preaching on people who have exceptional or notable lives is that it can further a lie, that it's our own greatness is what brings glory to God. But the teaching of the gospel is exactly the opposite of that. It's coming with the limited amount of gifts that we have, but putting it wholeheartedly to God. That's where the glory comes from. When we think about an offering that glorifies God, it has to humble us because we know we didn't make our gifts. We know we have an inheritance. We know that we have the people who have shaped us and formed us. We have the work of the Holy Spirit in us. It's no great credit to us to have a gift or to be good at something. It's a credit to God. James 1 says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, comes down from the Father of heavenly lights." And that's where our gifts come from. And the other point is following this widow at the offering. Our gifts are greatest when it's the best that we have. That's what makes them great, when it comes out of our capacity to give as much as we can. And exactly where you are limited is where your gift can mean the most, because you can come up against your capacity to give it to God. And that glories our Creator. So recall the Thema Regium. This is this weird, discordant, uncomfortable sequence of notes. And the King of Prussia said, "Make music out of this." What else seems like a strange and awkward and discordant mix of skills and failures and joys and hopes and disappointments and confidence and doubt and fear? Well, I do, and you do. That's what I have as my theme. And each of us have that in us. Not the theme of the kingdom, but the theme of our Creator. The Thema Creatoris. And that's what each of us has. No matter what our capacity or skills is, that unique mix of notes and discordancies and awkward steps and uncomfortable moves, that's exactly the theme that's in us to send back to God. We have the opportunity with the theme that the Creator puts in us to offer it back as praise, to offer it back only to the glory of God. And so the call out of reflecting on the life of Bach is this: take that Creator's theme in you and turn it back to glorify God. Make the best music that you can out of what God has given you. Whatever instruments you have, whatever gifts you have, those are the ones you can use. And give glory to God. Give all glory to God, and give glory to only God.